Well, I told you before that I recently went on a retreat at St. Gregory's Abbey, a Benedictine monastery in Three Rivers, Michigan. And when I first arrived, there was a cat that was following me around the monastery and the grounds of the abbey. And so I asked one of the monks there, "What's the cat's name?" And he said, "Oh, we call her Magnificat." And I took a picture of Magnificat, and I think to myself, what a great name. Because not only is she a magnificent cat, but of course it is a play on words of Mary's wonderful song, which we just heard, her song of joy to God, the Magnificat. And it is a song in which she proclaims joy at being able to magnify God. It's all about magnifying the magnificent. Such a beautiful song. And so today we're going to focus on Mary, Jesus' mother. Now, last year at this time, I told you a story about my friend who, when she was in the second grade, wanted to go to her friend's first Holy Communion. And her parents were kind of cautious about letting her go, because my friend was raised Lutheran, and her parents were kind of wary of the Catholic Church. Now, this was at a time in our country where people were kind of skeptical about voting for John F. Kennedy for president simply because he was a Catholic. And it was a time before Vatican II when the Catholic Church was very mysterious. The Mass was said in Latin, and the priest would say the Mass with his back to the congregation. So my friend's parents were really hesitant about letting her go, but she begged and pleaded, and so they allowed her to go to the First Holy Communion with her friend's family. And my friend said that when she got there, there was a big sign out front that said, "Our Lady of Perpetual Help." That was the name of the church. And she said that when she stepped in, she saw these beautiful stained glass windows, and each one had a beautiful depiction of this lady. And when she sat in the pew and looked up in the front of the church, she saw a huge 10-foot statue of this woman. And people were kneeling before her and lighting candles to her. And she watched during the service as her friend and all the little second graders received a beautiful strand of beads to pray to this woman. And when my friend got home from church, her mother said to her, "So, what did you think of the Catholic Church?" And my friend said, "I looked at my mother with wide eyes, and I said incredulously, 'Mom, you're not going to believe this, but their God is a woman.'" I love that story. And I wish more people would have that experience of God as mother, God as woman. That is what Mary represents to me. Now, we at Douglas UCC, we don't really talk about Mary very much. We talk about Mary around Christmas, but we kind of forget about her the rest of the year. And that's pretty typical of most Christian churches. Most Christian churches kind of say, "Oh, Mary, she's for the Catholics." Okay. And I think there are many Christians who are wary of Mary. That was going to be the title of my talk today. Then I thought it was really corny. But I think they're wary, not so much of Mary. I think what they're wary about is that they see this devotion to Mary, which they're cautious about, because it seems like idolatry, that they're placing Mary before Jesus, or they're attributing miracles to Mary, that there's this great devotion to her that makes some Christians uncomfortable. They see it as a form of blasphemy or heresy. Now, most of you know that I grew up Catholic, and that when I was in my 20s, I joined a monastery, I was a religious brother in the Catholic Church. And the order that I joined is known as the Marist Brothers. It is a group of religious men who are devoted to Mary, Jesus' mother. And every morning when we got up, and every evening before we went to our rooms to go to sleep, we joined together as a community to say prayers to Mary. And although I am no longer a Marist brother and I'm no longer a Catholic, I still have a great devotion to Mary. And she is very much a part of my prayer life, not only at Christmas, but throughout the year. And I think that we need her more than ever. We need the feminine voice. We need to empower that because our Christian church, and our world for that part, has stifled and oppressed the female voice. But a shift is happening, and it's happened this year. We began the year with the Women's March. Millions of people all over the world. Merriam-Webster's dictionary just this past week announced their word of the year, and their word of the year is feminism. And Time magazine just released their person of the year, and the cover features all the whistleblowers, all the women of the Me Too movement who have spoken their truth about the men who have harassed and abused them. So the feminine voice that has been stifled and oppressed is coming to the forefront, and our world needs it now more than ever. Pastor Rob Bell, in one of his books, which is called What We Talk About When We Talk About God, has a quote about this. He says, "When the female voice is repressed and stifled, the entire community can find themselves cut off from the sacred feminine, depriving themselves of the full image of God." When the female voice is repressed and stifled, the entire community can easily find themselves cut off from the sacred feminine, depriving themselves of the full image of God. When we do not in our Christian church and in our society in general hear that voice, we are cutting ourselves off from the full image of God, which is both masculine and feminine, male and female, God as Father and God both as Mother. And so that's who Mary represents for me, that feminine face of God, the face of the Divine Mother. But who was the real Mary? Who was she? Well, we've all kind of grown up with this image of her as being that meek and mild handmaiden, that perfect and obedient virgin. All of that is a myth. That is not who Mary was. Mary was tough. She was bold. She was courageous. She was radical. And she was revolutionary. During the time in which Mary lived, she was the lowest of the low. She was poor. She was a woman. She was Jewish. And she was an unwed, pregnant teenager. You couldn't get any lower. Politically, religiously, socially, she was outcast, oppressed, and marginalized. And yet, God chose her to birth the light into the world. God chose the lowest of the low, a poor, dark-skinned refugee, unwed pregnant teenager, to be mother of the light, to birth this new order. That's why we heard in our words of integration this morning that the Magnificat isn't just a pretty song of praise to God. If you actually listen to it, it is a subversive proclamation of revolution and liberation. Mary is saying, wow, of all the people in the world, God chose me. That's why my soul is magnifying God. That's why I am rejoicing, because God has looked with favor upon me, a lowly servant. And she says, God will bring down the mighty from their thrones and will lift up the lowly. She says, God is feeding the hungry like me, but is sending the rich away empty. This song, the Magnificat, is saying there is a new order on its way. That this is a new kingdom where the last shall be first, and where the first shall be last. That's what's so revolutionary and radical about it. Now, a friend of mine named Ryan Kuja, who happens to be a member of the Holland UCC, this week he rewrote the Magnificat in modern language. And I asked his permission if I could share it with all of you this morning. And he said yes. This is the modern day Mary proclaiming, I can't contain my excitement about this. Out of all people, God noticed me, a poor, pregnant teenager. Everyone will call me blessed from now on. God's love is so much greater than I could ever imagine. God's love is for everyone, even for people like me, whom society despises. The LGBTQ community, immigrants, refugees, the addicted and the shamed. God knows Black lives matter. Refugees and immigrants are God's beloved. All those people who are seen as less than human, God knows and loves. God lifts up those who are preyed upon by corrupt politicians. The hungry, the ones brutalized by the police and ICE, and families without health care. God invites each of us to the table to speak and to tell our story, to be heard and to be known. The power-hungry perpetrators who only care about their own agendas don't have the last word. We do. I can sense God's presence holding us and all of God's children close, faithfully liberating us all, just as God promised. That's the Magnificat. That's how powerful it was in her day as we're hearing it in our day. It is a song of a declaration of liberation, that there will be a new order, a new kingdom, in which the lowly will be lifted and the mighty will be pulled down from their thrones. Radical and revolutionary. Now we, like Mary, are part of God's plan to do this. God is calling upon us to birth the light. But we have to have the courage Mary did. Mary had the courage to say yes. And that's what Advent is all about. It's a time where all of us prepare to give our consent to God to birth the light that is within us. It is a time for us to get in touch with that light, to nurture that light, and then to go forth and shine that light. But it takes courage for us to do that. And Mary gives us a wonderful example of going out into the world and living our truth and speaking it boldly. And so on this third week of Advent, the week that we focus on joy, I want you to find time every day this week to rejoice, because God has chosen you. Of all the people in the world, God chose you to go forth and to bear God's light out into the world. This is also the week in which we celebrate the winter solstice. And so as we celebrate, let us all remind ourselves that we are called to be the light in this time of great darkness. Let us go forth and shine our light for all the world to see. One candle lights the way. Namaste.